She
I
said
really
it was
like your
forbidden,
smile.
and that only made me want it more. The first time I noticed her, I was
like
sitting in
yours
the
too.
back of the classroom, pretending to focus on my notes while stealing glances at her across the room. She moved with a quiet, effortless grace that made the mundane feel different. There was a soft sway to her step, the kind that made the sunlight catching her hair look like liquid gold. She wasn't just beautiful, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had long ago learned exactly who she was, and it showed in everything: the tilt of her head when she listened, the gentle lift of her eyebrow when she disagreed, the faint curve of a smile when she noticed something amusing in the corner of the room. I remember the first accidental brush of hands over graded papers. My pulse spiked, a warmth rising in my chest that had nothing to do with the classroom heat. Her fingers lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, and I could feel her calm steadiness, the subtle reassurance of her presence. There was something magnetic about her, not just the way she looked, but the way she seemed to see everything and everyone clearly, including me, even when I tried to hide in plain sight. It was during one of those quiet moments that she spoke, almost casually, yet with a glint in her eye that suggested she knew the effect she had. "Some things," she said softly, "are better left unexplored." Her voice was warm, smooth, and carried an undercurrent of playfulness I wasn't expecting. I dared a smile, leaning just slightly closer. "That's exactly what makes them fun," I whispered back, heart hammering in a way that made me feel almost ridiculous. Even now, I remember the sound of her laugh, quiet, a little restrained, but with an undertone that made it feel like a secret meant only for me. There was tension there, subtle and unspoken, threading through the ordinary: the way she rearranged her notes, how the sunlight caught on her glasses, how her perfume lingered faintly in the air after she passed. I felt drawn in, even as my mind raced with the knowledge that this was complicated. That day, I realized the spark wasn't just attraction. It was curiosity, the pull of someone who seemed untouchable yet unexpectedly human. It was the thrill of knowing that whatever this was, it was forbidden, and that very word made every glance, every brush of hands, every quiet shared moment feel charged with unspoken possibilities. And in that moment, I didn't just notice her. I felt the first pull of something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I should. It started with the library. I had stayed late to finish a project, not expecting anyone else to be there, and yet she appeared, as if drawn by some quiet gravity I couldn't name. The air smelled faintly of old books and her subtle perfume, a warm vanilla scent that made my chest tighten in ways I didn't fully understand. She was leaning over the same textbook I was struggling with, her fingers tracing lines on the page, the soft light from the desk lamp catching on her hair and making it glow like amber. "Here," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial, and reached across my notes. Our hands brushed, lightly, accidentally, but I felt the spark linger, like static electricity traveling through the small space between us. I tried to focus on the words, but every time our fingers touched, I felt a heat rising in my chest, a tension that had nothing to do with the assignment. She looked at me, those sharp, warm eyes holding mine longer than necessary, and I realized she noticed it too. A small smile played on her lips, just enough to be teasing, just enough to make me aware of the forbidden line we were approaching. "You're learning fast," she said softly, but there was a hint of challenge in her tone. The way she leaned closer, the subtle tilt of her shoulder, made the space between us electric. For a moment, we simply sat there, side by side, our shoulders brushing as we pored over the pages. I was acutely aware of her presence, the warmth radiating from her arm, the quiet sound of her breath as she explained a concept, the way her hand hovered near mine before withdrawing just slightly. Every gesture, every glance, carried a meaning neither of us dared speak aloud. When she finally straightened up, gathering her things, I felt a pang of disappointment, not from her leaving, but from the sudden absence of the tension, the connection, the unspoken acknowledgement that we were dancing around something dangerous yet undeniably compelling. "See you tomorrow?" she asked casually, but her eyes lingered, and in that gaze, I felt a promise, a challenge, and a warning all at once. Walking home, I couldn't stop replaying the small details, the brush of her hand, the warmth of her presence, the thrill of proximity. I understood then that it wasn't just her beauty or confidence that drew me in, it was the way she made ordinary moments feel intimate, charged, and impossibly alive. The forbidden nature of it, the delicate line we were towing, made every touch, every glance, feel electric. I couldn't help but want more, even if I knew I shouldn't. The rain had started unexpectedly, a soft drizzle that blurred the edges of the campus courtyard. I was heading to my dorm, notebook clutched under my arm, when I saw her standing beneath the shelter of an umbrella. Our eyes met, and I noticed, almost immediately, the way her hair stuck slightly to her temple in the rain, the quiet vulnerability in the way she adjusted her scarf. There was no one else around, just the sound of rain tapping lightly on the pavement, and it felt like the world had narrowed to this single, suspended moment. She beckoned me over, and without thinking, I was beside her, sharing the small, slightly cramped umbrella. Our shoulders brushed, a warm, accidental contact that lingered far too long to be random. I felt her body subtly lean toward mine, just enough for me to feel the quiet steadiness of her presence. There was a tension in that closeness, unspoken but undeniable, and it made my pulse race in a way I hadn't experienced before. We walked together in silence, the rhythm of our steps sinking almost naturally. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, but beneath it was the faint trace of her perfume, warm, calming, yet intoxicating. My mind kept flashing between rational thought and pure fascination. I knew the lines we were crossing weren't just physical, but the moral weight of it only seemed to make the moments feel more vivid, more urgent. Then she spoke, quietly, almost like she was revealing a secret. "I don't usually stay in the rain like this," she said, her voice soft but confident. "But somehow, it's easier to talk when no one's watching." She glanced at me, her eyes lingering, searching mine for a reaction. I realized then that she was letting me in, giving me access to something personal, something real. I felt my heart ache with the gravity of that trust, and yet a thrill ran beneath it, dangerous and irresistible. When we reached a covered bench, she sat first, tucking her legs slightly beneath her. I hesitated before sitting beside her, acutely aware of the small space between us. Our hands brushed again as she reached for her notebook, a contact charged with meaning. I noticed the subtle intake of her breath, the way her head tilted ever so slightly toward me, the quiet pause in our conversation where our eyes met and neither of us looked away. In that moment, the boundary between teacher and student felt fragile, and yet the trust and connection between us made it feel almost sacred. Walking back, drenched but smiling, I knew this was the first time we had intentionally crossed a line. It wasn't reckless, it was deliberate, a slow, careful dance towards something we both understood but neither fully named. And for the first time, I realized that the forbidden nature of it made every moment feel electric, every glance, every brush of hands, every shared laugh heightened by the knowledge that this was ours alone. The late evening study sessions had become something I looked forward to more than I would admit. The classroom was empty now, lit only by the soft amber glow of the desk lamps. The quiet hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the old floorboards were the only sounds. It should have felt ordinary, academic, yet every glance, every movement, was charged with something far more complicated. She sat across from me, flipping through her notes, and I realized I was acutely aware of every detail, the subtle way her necklace caught the light, the way her sleeve brushed against her wrist as she adjusted her posture, the faint warmth radiating from her presence. Our shoulders touched lightly when she leaned over to point at something on my page, and I felt a jolt, a quiet, electric thrill that made my fingers tingle. I caught her looking at me once, the smallest flicker of a smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't a casual glance, it was deliberate, knowing. I couldn't help but notice the hesitation in my own movements. I wanted to inch closer, to let our hands touch more deliberately, yet a part of me pulled back, weighed down by the knowledge of the rules we were bending. That hesitation only made the tension sharper, the air between us thicker. "You're concentrating too hard," she said softly, her voice carrying that subtle teasing edge that made me want to respond in kind. I laughed, though it caught in my throat, and she leaned closer again under the pretense of pointing at a passage. Our fingers brushed once more, this time lingering for a heartbeat longer. I felt the warmth of her arm near mine, a quiet comfort wrapped around an undeniable pull. The irony wasn't lost on me. The closer we got, the more aware we were of how forbidden this connection was. Each small, deliberate contact felt like a risk, yet also an exhilaration. My mind oscillated between restraint and desire, aware that even a lingering glance or a brush of hands carried weight. And still, I couldn't stop noticing her, the way her hair fell across her cheek when she was deep in thought, the gentle tilt of her head when she asked a question, the quiet laughter that bubbled up when our conversation meandered into shared jokes. By the time the session ended, my chest ached with unspoken tension. We gathered our things slowly, our hands brushing more often than necessary. Her smile as she said goodbye was warm but fleeting, leaving me suspended in a mix of longing and frustration. The forbidden nature of it all, the rules, the societal expectations, the stakes, made every small moment feel electric. And in that quiet tension, I realized how much I wanted to cross the line, yet how careful I had to be. It was late when I found myself walking toward the quiet cafe tucked just off campus. The city lights reflected softly in the puddles, the hum of distant traffic like a low, steady heartbeat. She was already there, seated in the corner, a small lamp casting a warm glow over her face. I could see the subtle tension in her posture, shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, and I realized that even after weeks of stolen moments, she carried the same quiet vulnerability I had begun to recognize in myself. When I slid into the chair across from her, the proximity was immediate but gentle. Our knees brushed under the table, a light, accidental contact that sent a shiver through me, a reminder that every small touch had grown charged with meaning. She didn't pull away, instead, she tilted her head slightly toward me, her expression soft, inviting. The warmth of her presence wrapped around me, comforting yet intensely stirring, and I found it hard to focus on anything except the way her eyes seemed to hold unspoken thoughts. We talked quietly at first, about mundane things, the weather, a lecture, a book she had recommended. But gradually, the conversation shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward more personal territory. She shared a small, intimate story about her past, a moment that had shaped her in ways I could never have imagined. I listened, heart pounding, aware of the fragile trust she was offering. Her voice was soft, yet steady, carrying a weight that made my chest ache in recognition. Without realizing it, my hand found the edge of hers on the table, and she didn't pull away. The contact was light, almost a whisper against her skin, but it spoke volumes: comfort, connection, a silent acknowledgement that we were both aware of the line we were towing. I could feel her warmth, the steady rhythm of her pulse through the thin skin of her hand, and it made the space between us feel impossibly intimate. She laughed softly at something I said, and it was that quiet sound that made my chest tighten. For the first time, I understood that this attraction was more than physical, it was the feeling of being truly seen. In her presence, I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to hold back. And from the way she lingered on my gaze, I knew she felt the same. When we finally stood to leave, our hands brushed again, a lingering, deliberate contact that neither of us broke immediately. The night air felt electric as we walked side by side, both aware of the unspoken confessions hanging between us. That evening, I realized something profound: what we were building wasn't just desire, it was trust, connection, and a bond that felt far more dangerous, and far more necessary, because it was forbidden. The classroom was quiet, bathed in the warm amber glow of the late afternoon sun. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of light, settling around us like a soft, invisible curtain. She was there first, seated at the edge of the teacher's desk, her posture casual yet commanding, exuding that same quiet confidence that had drawn me in from the very beginning. I hesitated at the doorway, my notebook clutched loosely in my hands, aware of the tension in the air, a tension neither of us could ignore any longer. When I stepped inside, our eyes met, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of us. I noticed the subtle shift in her expression, the way her gaze softened, the slight tilt of her head, the faint curve of her lips. I felt my pulse quicken, the weight of weeks of stolen glances, brushes of hands, and unspoken words pressing down on me. I was acutely aware of the line we were about to cross, and yet, for the first time, the fear didn't outweigh the pull. She motioned toward the chair beside her, and as I sat, our knees brushed lightly under the desk. It was no longer accidental, it was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the closeness we had both been resisting and craving. I could feel the warmth of her arm near mine, the subtle pressure as if inviting me into her space without words. Each small gesture carried meaning, the way she adjusted her hair so it fell gently across her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the warm air around us, the way her eyes held mine long enough to make me forget everything else. "I know it's complicated," she said softly, her voice carrying that signature blend of calm authority and quiet vulnerability. "But I can't ignore this anymore." The words weren't loud, but they hit me with the force of a confession. My chest tightened, and I realized how much I had been waiting for her to say them, for the walls between us to crumble, even if just a little. I reached out, lightly touching her cheek, feeling the softness beneath my fingers, the subtle warmth that had been a constant pull throughout our encounters. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly, and in that moment, everything became clear. We were choosing this, each other, despite the risks, despite the whispers of doubt that lingered at the edges of our minds. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the classroom, we sat together in quiet understanding. The forbidden was no longer just a warning, it was the very reason our connection felt electric, meaningful, and undeniable. And in that shared silence, I realized we had crossed the threshold from longing to choice, from hesitation to acceptance, embracing the intimacy and trust that had quietly grown between us. The weekend air was soft, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the campus gardens. I walked beside her, our steps unhurried, the city humming quietly around us. For the first time, the tension that had defined our encounters was replaced by something more grounded, a quiet, warm intimacy that felt both natural and exhilarating. We were no longer just two people skirting the edges of forbidden desire, we had crossed into a space where connection and trust mattered more than the rules we had once feared. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, side by side, shoulders brushing occasionally. Each touch was light but deliberate, a hand grazing hers as we passed a bench, an arm brushing against mine when we reached a curve in the path. There was no urgency, no need for words, the closeness itself spoke volumes. I felt a sense of ease I hadn't allowed myself to feel before, a deep reassurance that the bond we had built could survive the scrutiny of the world outside. She paused to laugh at something I said, and the sound wrapped around me like a warm shawl. Her eyes sparkled, catching the late afternoon sun, and I realized I had memorized every detail, the curve of her smile, the softness of her gaze, the way her hand lingered near mine as if testing whether it could finally rest there. And when our hands finally met, it wasn't tentative or fleeting, it was steady, deliberate, a promise in the silence that neither of us needed to voice. We found a quiet bench overlooking the small campus pond. She leaned slightly toward me, and I felt her shoulder press gently against mine. There was no rush, no hesitation, only the simple, profound comfort of being close to someone who understood you completely. I brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, and she tilted her head toward my hand, letting me linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was a small gesture, but in it was the culmination of weeks of unspoken longing, playful teasing, and quiet confessions. As we sat there, watching the ripples in the water, I realized how much had changed. The forbidden tension that had defined our early interactions had transformed into something deeper, more enduring, trust, mutual respect, and a quiet, shared joy in each other's presence. When she glanced at me and smiled, I felt a warmth that went far beyond attraction. It was connection, companionship, and the thrill of a love that had grown patiently, deliberately, and beautifully. By the time we walked back, hands intertwined, the sun had dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the paths we had walked together. Every step felt lighter, more certain. The world around us hadn't changed, but we had, embracing not just the excitement of the forbidden, but the enduring intimacy that had grown from it. And in that quiet, golden moment, I understood that what we shared was more than a fleeting thrill, it was a slow-burn connection that would linger long after the campus lights dimmed, a love built on trust, warmth, and a quiet, undeniable desire that was no longer forbidden, only ours. If you felt the tension and warmth in this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another slow burn romance. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that felt forbidden, yet impossible to resist?